Welcome to the Capitol News. I am your host, Alex Karitis. Today is Tuesday, March 3rd, 2020. Thank you so much for joining me. Title of today's podcast, A Loss of Confidence, and that has a question mark at the end of it. Again, the Capitol News is quite timely. Didn't know this was going to be the case, but again, we are quite timely. It's Super Tuesday. We will have a brief discussion on that at the time of this podcast. The votes are still coming in, especially in the biggest contests of the evening in Texas and in California. But at least at this time, Senator Bernie Sanders has won 3 states, and former Vice President Joe Biden has won 8. So he has a lot of momentum behind him, that is Joe Biden, after winning the primary in South Carolina. We'll see how well it continues. We'll see how well he does in Texas and in California. That'll be a discussion we have a little later on. I only want to talk about a couple of things on this podcast today. I want to talk about market performance. I want to talk about, more specifically, what the Federal Reserve did today, and then wrap everything up with some Super Tuesday analysis. So the Federal Reserve, I don't know, in some attempt to quote-unquote rescue the markets once again, in an attempt to relieve the crackheads on Wall Street and thunder thumbs in the White House, they attempted to come to the rescue with an intermeeting emergency rate cut of 50 basis points. What we have been witnessing over the past year have been incremental cuts of 25 basis points that maintain some sort of range for the federal funds rate. 1.75% to 2%, that's the range, 1.5 to 1.75. You understand, we talk about this all the time. Well, now the federal funds rate now sits within a range of 1% to 1.25% following this emergency cut of 50 basis points. What's the emergency? We are told daily that this is the greatest economy ever. We are told now with daily press conferences that there is no emergency with coronavirus. Same administration, same people, by the way. So what's the emergency? Why are you cutting by 50 basis points? 25 wasn't enough? Why do you even have to cut? If this is the greatest economy ever, and coronavirus offers no sort of threat to the livelihood of people, to their actual lives, or to the economic system at large, because everything here in the United States is under control, then why would they cut? And why would it be an emergency cut? And the last time there was an emergency cut was back during the great financial crisis. I believe it was December of 2008. When we were 1 year in to that recession, because it was officially started in December of 2007, but it was not called a recession. That was not called the start of it until 1 year later from the National Bureau of Economic Research. Remember, there's a lag by the time they actually call it officially, because there's a lot of revisions to data. They want to make sure that they're doing their best to identify the peak and when you start that decline, the beginning of the recession. So for all intents and purposes, more than a decade ago, in December of 2008, you could say there was some sort of emergency. There was a recession. There was financial collapse. It was global. So, okay, maybe you can understand why the Federal Reserve did it. Everybody knew we were in recession. It was admitted. Lehman Brothers had collapsed. Bear Stearns had been acquired by J.P. Morgan. Other banks have collapsed or were collapsing. The stock market was selling off dramatically. Here, we were just at all-time highs a week and a half ago. And we're told this is the greatest economy ever. We're told that the coronavirus, nothing to see here, folks. So what's the emergency? And was Jay Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, was he pressed on this during his press conference? No. There's no major pressure put on the Federal Reserve chairman. There's no pressure put on any of these idiots in charge. whether it's at the White House, whether it's in Congress, whether it's at the Federal Reserve. It's softball questions, and if somebody does have the balls to ask a hard question, they dodge it anyway. Nobody's held to account. Crisis of credibility. Podcast we did just the other evening. There is no leadership, there is no accountability, there is no credibility. And just yesterday, I reiterated to this audience one of my biggest concerns, which has been one of my biggest concerns for years. And this is in writing, this is in our book, The Cynic's Guide to Investing, and this has been what I have been discussing since this podcast has been online for over a year now. One of my biggest concerns is diminishing marginal returns with respect to what the Federal Reserve and other central banks, and for that matter, the fiscal response that comes from federal governments, when that runs out of bullets, when it runs out of ammunition, when they start shooting blanks. When that day happens, because people have been conditioned like Pavlovian dogs here. There's a sell-off, there's a hiccup. Here comes the federal government. Here comes a central bank. Maybe both. Right now, it's becoming both. This is the coordinated effort now. Nation upon nation. This is a coordinated effort to inflate and keep asset prices as high as possible. Don't let them sell off. Don't let them go down. And if they do, make sure you pump them back up as quickly as possible. But that day of reckoning, when people start to wake up and they start to realize that this is a charade, this has been a big game, a big fraud, that the foundation has been one that has been built on sand, not on concrete, the house of cards is going to come tumbling down once again. That has been my biggest concern, that the central banks are not going to be able to reflate and inflate asset prices again, that everybody in the market is going to be awoken to what is taking place, and they're going to say, this isn't going to do it. Isn't going to do it. If it's something that might be financially related, if it's something that's man-made, then you can say, oh, well, maybe we can stimulate some sort of demand-side response if we cut interest rates. Maybe. If anything else, it's liquidity thrown into the market, and we can at least buy stocks and other financial assets, and we can be off to the races. But how is printing money, how is lowering interest rates, how is that going to solve the coronavirus? Because that's the excuse. That's the emergency that was not an emergency a few days ago. Right? Not according to our authorities, not according to our president, not according to our vice president. Not according to many other governments, for that matter. Yet countries are shutting down. So it's not an emergency, but we're just shutting down our economies, our countries. Stay home, don't do anything. But it's not an emergency. Been saying this here now for the past couple of months since coronavirus came onto the scene. And again, a lot of you might think that I'm overhyping it, talking about it too much, but I said I think it's the real deal, or it's going to turn into something much bigger. And unfortunately, I have been proven correct. And the numbers in the United States and outside of China are growing, and they're growing rapidly. And once we start testing here in the United States, which is supposed to start taking place very soon, these numbers are going to jump, and they're going to jump exponentially, which I discussed yesterday as well. Printing money is not a vaccine. Printing money is not a therapeutic response to a virus. And of course, understand, ladies and gentlemen, what's really going on here. That the coronavirus is just a convenient excuse for these idiots as cover to do these policies, to cut interest rates, to print money, to justify some sort of fiscal stimulus. Because no politician, no central banker wants to take responsibility for their actions. This came out of left field. We never seen this coming. Now we have to band together as the human race, and we got to throw more money at the problem. We'll give it to you. We'll shore up bad businesses. We'll offer lines of credit. Who knows what these people are going to come up with? We'll cut interest rates. We'll print money. We'll do X, Y, Z. None of this is going to solve the problem of the coronavirus. And none of this is going to solve the underlying structural issues that this global economy is facing. This has been the perpetual kick the can down the road mentality that we have been adopting year after year after year since the great financial crisis, over a decade, with seemingly no end in sight until it becomes a loss of confidence without that being a question. When it is no longer a question that this is a loss of confidence, that that's it. The game is over. The music has stopped. Do you and will you have a chair? Because most people won't. Most people aren't even going to know what hit them. That's how bad this is going to get. And I'm telling you, fourth quarter of 2018, what we witnessed in the stock market was a precursor. And we just saw another precursor last week with the quickest 10% drop from an all-time high ever. Then you look at the bond market that I said is really where you have to pay attention to. And we've been on this for a very long time here because it's the bigger, deeper market, more liquidity, the much bigger market, the bond market is relative to the stock market. There's been a major disconnect between the bond market and the stock market. And we say, well, they both can't be right. One of them saying, well, we're at all-time highs in the stock market. Everything's going to be fine. We're at growth, all full speed ahead. And the bond market said, no, I don't think so. Well, the bond market, in terms of yields, continues to crater. Record lows on the long bond, the 30-year Treasury. And now a record low on the 10-year Treasury note. Going below, yielding below 1%. Below 1% for the first time in history. Below 1%. Give Uncle Sam your money for 10 years, and you're not even going to get 1%. But this is the greatest economy ever. Makes no sense whatsoever. You're being lied to. And I really hope that people start to wake up and understand this. And they are. Because despite the fact that these yields in the bond market were going lower, which was basically the market leading the Federal Reserve, telling the Federal Reserve you have to cut interest rates. 1.5% to 1.75% ain't gonna cut it, even though that's near record all-time lows. Ain't gonna cut it. So you're gonna have to cut rates. And they did, in an emergency meeting nonetheless, because they're scheduled to meet in 2 weeks for their regularly scheduled March meeting for the Federal Open Market Committee. And now you have future markets, the futures, predicting that the Federal Reserve is going to cut yet again, at least by 25 basis points. Some think it's going to be 50 basis points, another 50 basis points. Some people think they're going to take it all the way down to zero. All the way down to 0%. Not making this stuff up. I've been warning this audience, I've been telling you guys about this for over a year, that this was coming, that this is what these idiots were going to continue to do. And don't forget that Thunder Thumbs tweeted out again today, because he and his administration have been calling on the Federal Reserve to do this, and they've been calling on them to do an emergency cut. And lo and behold, they did it. Yet somehow, the Federal Reserve is independent of politics. You're not that stupid, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you're not buying this line of bull. But it wasn't enough for Thunder Thumbs, was it? No, because he had to have a nice long tweet today saying, yes, the Federal Reserve cut, but they need to do more. They need to keep easing. And then he's talking about what other countries in Europe are doing and how the United States is falling behind and we're supposed to be the leaders and ba 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 ba. BS, BS, BS. One after the next. We do not want we have real negative rates. We do not want nominal negative rates in this country, but that's where we're headed. That is where we are headed. It is destroying the financial systems in Japan. It is destroying the financial systems in Europe. Japan, for all intents and purposes, is in a technical recession. Germany is in a technical recession. Italy is likely headed into a technical recession. The list goes on and on and on. They've had negative interest rates for a long time. It is not the saving grace. So why does Thunder Thumbs think that's going to be some sort of saving grace for the United States of America? How is that going to benefit you? You know, this country remains a net importer, meaning we import more than we export. Because he always wants to talk about, well, it gives us an unfair advantage, a disadvantage when it comes to trade because it hurts our exporters. Well, we import more than we export. So how is that helping the everyday American? How is that helping so many small and medium-sized companies in this country who do more importing than they do exporting? Because it's going to make their costs more expensive because you're weakening the dollar. How is this benefiting you? You have a savings account? Now, they immediately aren't going to come for them, but they will. They held off for a long time in Europe, but now they're going after them. Same thing will take place here. And the United States has more debt than most countries around the world. $24 trillion and counting. And again, these deficits don't take into consideration a recession. They will be $1.5 trillion, $2 trillion, maybe even larger than that when you know what hits the fan. And despite the fact that the Federal Reserve came to the rescue today, most of those gains, those miraculous blockbuster gains that the market witnessed, which was actually an all-time point gain for the Dow Jones Industrial Average, almost, 1,300 points for the day, gave most of it back today. The major indexes down about 3%. Russell 2000 down a little bit over 2% for the day. They pretty much gave it all back after the Federal Reserve did what the markets wanted. Buy the rumor, sell the fact? Is that what we just witnessed? Is it this loss of confidence? We got to go deeper? Well, 1% to 1.25%. We don't have that much ammunition, especially if the Federal Reserve is going to start cutting at 50 basis point increments. Because if they put the pedal to the metal, we can get to zero very quickly. We might get there in 2 weeks. Then what? Then what are they going to do? Oh, and ladies and gentlemen, don't forget, despite the fact that the Federal Reserve told us that they were going to start tapering in the repo markets, well, they threw in $100 billion today. So let's get this straight. The Federal Reserve throws in $100 billion, gives the market a 50 basis point rate cut, emergency rate cut. In the Dow Jones Industrial Average, the S&P 500, the NASDAQ, all fall about 3%, and the Russell 2000 falls a little over 2%. You get what I'm saying here? You're starting to grasp the picture, the severity of what's taking place here. Now, one day does not make a trend. Maybe tomorrow it rallies again. But this type of volatility of up 1,000, down 1,000, up 1,000, how many people are going to stomach this type of volatility? Especially older people who are close to retirement or are in retirement and they just cannot stomach the volatility. When will it end? When will people start to pull out of the markets? That is where we are headed. This is a process. It's not going to happen in a day. It's not going to happen in a week. It's going to take time. It always does. This is a very large economy. It's a very large global economy. It's not at the drop of a hat, the flip of a switch. It's a process. But remember, all of that BS money printing and repo market adjustments and lowering interest rates 3 times last year, the melt-up we witnessed since September of last year to 2 weeks ago in February of this year, all got wiped out. It all got eliminated in a handful of trading sessions. Escalator up, elevator down. So what's the Fed to do? Because cutting interest rates doesn't make people get on a plane and go fly on their vacation again if they're concerned about coronavirus. It's not going to tell the many companies around the world, Google, Ford, so many others, oh, the Federal Reserve cut interest rates. Forget that travel ban that we're putting on our employees. No, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Sam. Go ahead and fly over to Wuhan, China. It's perfectly safe now. Don't you know the Federal Reserve cut interest rates by 50 basis points? You're perfectly safe. Take your wife, your kids, have a good time. You don't need a mask. Don't wash your hands. Play in the mud with the pigs. Have fun. That's not how it works. And for these idiots to think that they can somehow stimulate the economy by doing this is ridiculous. It's laughable. It's quite pathetic, actually. But that's the state of our global affairs. That is the state of our global leadership or lack thereof. And it's everywhere. It permeates everywhere. Through the White House, through the Capitol, through the central bank at the Federal Reserve. Country after country after country. That's why we have protests after protest after protest all over the place. Now, depending on how well these countries and these governments can handle the coronavirus, well, now you might really start to see some people get some really pissed off if they can't handle this. Or if it's found out that the numbers have been fudged, that they're not truthful, that governments around the world have been lying, deceiving the public as to what the actual outcome of this outbreak is. Just watch. Just watch. Because there's no doubt in my mind that every government has been lying to us. Most definitely the Chinese Communist Party. And the CDC and the World Health Organization in the United States of America is no different. It's no different. Until that point comes where they have to be as open and transparent as possible. Why? Because that little word we like to talk about here all the time, credibility. Credibility. That's like the president meeting with his round table of pharmaceutical CEOs yesterday, going around asking them questions about vaccines. How many times have I said on this podcast that a vaccine is going to take between 12 to 18 months at a minimum for it to be approved, that it's safe, that it's effective, and that it's ready for mass distribution globally? I'm not a scientist, I'm not an epidemiologist, but this is what the people are saying. This is what the president's people are saying. I'm simply reiterating what the experts on the issue are saying. There's various trials, there's various phases it has to go through for that very purpose. That it needs to be proven that it is safe and that it is effective. And you cannot rush this. And again, why? That word credibility. If you rush a vaccine and it proves to be ineffective, and it proves to be harmful, but you rushed it through, you're in a lot of, you know what you're in a lot of trouble, pal. You're in a lot of trouble. And I actually somewhat felt bad for the president. I was somewhat embarrassed too, because he was asking some pretty pathetic and poor questions that you would think a man in his 70s would have some semblance of what the trial process is like. He doesn't have to be a master of it. I don't expect any person to be a master of everything. But listening to people on the news, reading an article here or there over the course of your life of 70-something years, you don't know what a vaccine is, you don't know what these trial processes are. You actually think that they can just sequence it and then boom, there's a vaccine ready to go the next day? I understand the president wants results. I understand he wants this to be resolved quickly. But lives are literally in the balance here. You cannot rush this stuff. Now, maybe you can fast track some of it, and I'm all for that, as long as it's safe and effective. I mean, he was even called out by one of the doctors who's been on TV quite a bit, Dr. Tony Fauci, with the NIH, during one of these exchanges between the president and one of these CEOs within a pharmaceutical company, when the pharmaceutical CEO was basically trying to explain to the president the process of a vaccine, what it has to go through before it can hit the market. And Dr. Fauci even interceded and interjected, and he said, "Hey, Mr. President, I've told you this on numerous occasions, that the quickest we can get this done and to the market is 12 months to 18 months. So what I'm getting at here is this just goes to show that a lot of the critics, a lot of the things that people go against this president on, that he doesn't pay attention, that he hears what he wants to hear, that what's in his head is what's gospel. Well, this is it in real time. He's no scientist, and that's fine. You don't have to be. But when you have somebody who has been saying to you time and time again, or at least in front of you time and time again, which we know this because it's on video, that a vaccine is going to take 12 to 18 months, understand that that's the case. Period. End of story. Can there be some sort of therapeutical developments in the meantime that's able to treat this thing? Sure. And they're working on it. But even those studies to know as to whether or not those are safe and effective are going to take months in and of themselves. The whole point goes to credibility. It's what it all comes down to. And the fact that there is no leadership. The president was more concerned about the stock market, downplaying the coronavirus. There's only 15 people who have it. Most of them are going to recover. Everything's fine. And then boom, we have over 100 cases and 9 people dead. This audience knew better, I hope, if you've been listening. Those are just the numbers, folks. And those are greatly, greatly understated because of the lack of testing that has been conducted in the United States. The lack of testing that has been conducted all over the world, for that matter. And I'm not saying this to cause any type of panic. Most people will have mild symptoms. Most people will recover. Thank goodness. Some will pass away, and some are going to have severe conditions, severe symptoms that's going to put them in the hospital. And that is my concern, and that has been my concern for quite a while that I've been sharing with this audience. Because if you overwhelm medical establishments, the medical systems, you got a problem. If you have to shut down schools, if you have to shut down businesses, you have an economic problem. So it compounds. This is understandable. But that has been my concern. Not that this thing is going to wipe out 1 billion people or 2 billion people, but 1 billion people might become infected. And what are the downstream effects of that, if that should happen? Because I would like to know if the window for containment is still open or if it has been closed. Because I do believe there are some people within Johns Hopkins University who believe it's been closed. So basically what that means, you have to delay as much of it as possible. And you have to pretty much allow it to run its course. We'll see what happens. But I can assure you that a 50 basis point rate cut, or any type of rate cut for that matter, is not going to solve the problem. We talked yesterday that the Reserve Bank of Australia cut their interest rate by 25 basis points to a record low of 0.5%. The Australian market also sold off on the back of that information. Diminishing marginal returns, folks. You can laugh at me. You can say, that's nothing. That's Econ 101. That's exactly right. It is Econ 101. This is one of the first things that students are taught in their economics courses. Diminishing marginal returns. And they're taught that because it's real. It exists. And it can have devastating effects if people at the helm continue to push bad medicine onto the patient, which is what we're seeing here with fiscal stimulus and monetary stimulus. It's run its course. It's run its course for over a decade. These people got away with murder. They got away with collapsing the financial system a decade ago, and they're on the brink of doing it again. And guess what? We have to swallow the pill. We got to swallow the medicine now. Because kicking the can further down the road is not going to solve a damn thing. Not a thing. People never wake up until it's too late. Well, people are going to have to get smacked in the face. That's going to have to be the medicine. That's going to be the point. But one of the problems is we don't have any leadership. We don't have anybody up there talking about the issues that we talk about here all the time, that the Federal Reserve needs to be abolished and that the federal income tax needs to be abolished. At a minimum. At a minimum. If you want to get serious, if you want to make sure we don't repeat the same errors of the past, for which we have been doing for generations now. This is why we have the political theater that we have been witnessing in this country and around the world for years. This is why you have the spectrum of a Donald Trump and a Bernie Sanders. They are tapping into people's frustration with the status quo, that they know something's wrong, but they can't quite put their finger on the cause of it. We know what the cause is. It's the Federal Reserve and it's taxation. It's a crime. It's theft. It's theft of your property, your labor, your wages. And people just walk around, oh, well, you got to pay it. You got to do this. You got to do that. And then they complain about XYZ every 4 years. And then some other idiot gets in the White House and they say, oh, well, he's going to take care of it. And then he doesn't. And then they're back here bitching and moaning about the same problems again. Well, you got to pay. You got to do this, that. People don't wake up. And I got to pay for it. I got to subsidize this stupidity. I don't like it. Again, if all of this money that we threw into the Treasury and we had fantastic infrastructure, if we had a great healthcare system where the costs weren't outrageous, I'd say, well, yeah, you could at least make the argument, Alex, look at all these great things we have as a result of all this, but we don't have those great things. There's great doctors here, there's great facilities, but the costs are outrageous. They're outrageous. Education, secondary education is outrageous. K through 12, these kids can't read or write. Don't know arithmetic. No child left behind. They're all left behind. A race to the top? No, that means a race to the bottom. If this country was so exceptional, it sure doesn't look like it. Sure doesn't act like it. And when you have the rhetoric that comes out of the mouth of the President of the United States and some of the quote-unquote leadership of people in the Republican Party and the Democratic Party in Congress, doesn't sound exceptional either. But don't worry, the Federal Reserve cut interest rates. And this is the greatest economy of all time. So, to some of the politics of Super Tuesday, it appears that it is going to be a two-man race between Vice President Joe Biden and Senator Bernie Sanders. Somewhat surprising to me. I anticipated Bernie Sanders. Joe Biden was the sleeper. I thought he was going to get knocked out. I thought Bloomberg was going to have a better show this evening. He did not. Chances are he will end up dropping out, I would have to imagine, unless something surprising happens in Texas or California. But that was a lot of money that he spent. Of course, it was a drop in the bucket to him. And people obviously benefited from it. That was their jobs. It was spent real estate, opening up shops, people getting paid to do XYZ, all of the ad campaigns. People got paid. So it's not, people are going to say, well, it was a complete waste of money. Now, people got paid. They're spending it. They're saving it. People had jobs as a response of it. I mean, I understand it. It's ridiculous, but, it's a drop in the bucket. And most of the money that this man has made and earned over his lifetime is going to be going to worthy causes, as most of it already has. But nonetheless, it's basically a two-man race. And I am surprised with Joe Biden. A lot of this may go back to Bloomberg's poor performance in that first debate. Or they just, people are more familiar with Joe Biden over Bloomberg, and they're looking for somebody who can beat Trump. Because from the exit polls, at least what we're being told, most people are more concerned with somebody who can beat Trump as opposed to voting for somebody who idealistically they agree with. That's very interesting. Very interesting. Now, we got a long time to go until November. But is Joe Biden, if he becomes the nominee, is he going to have enough momentum? Is he going to have enough people turn out for him? Because he doesn't have a swelling grassroots movement like Bernie Sanders does. Like Donald Trump does. I've been thinking, and I've shared this with this audience, that Bernie Sanders can win. He can win the whole thing. Because of an argument that he makes that can sound very appealing to a lot of people. That we take in all of this money and most of it goes to corporate welfare, Well, I think that money should go to you. And a lot of people are angry, a lot of people are frustrated. And they say, yeah, I could use a bailout. We've been bailing out Wall Street. We've been bailing out corporate America for years. Yeah, give me some of that money. It's mine anyway. That resonates with people. Doesn't mean it's the solution, because it's not the solution. But that resonates. Because, well, if you're going to give it to them, why can't you give it to me? And that's going to be his argument. And that gets people wound up. And in order to beat Donald Trump, you have to get the vote out. You just have to. You have to get the vote out if you're going to defeat Donald Trump. Because his base is going to come out for him lock, stock, and barrel. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. The question with the Democrat, whoever that might be, whether that's Bernie Sanders or Biden, or maybe somebody else, it's still possible, it could be somebody else. Is there going to be enough people out there, or young people going to be energized to vote for Joe Biden? They're energized to vote for Sanders. Will they be energized to vote for Biden? If the young people come out, then the Democrats will have a good chance of beating Donald Trump. If they stay home, Donald Trump will run away with it. Same thing with minorities. If minorities are energized and come out to vote, the Democrats will get the vast majority of them, and they'll likely beat Donald Trump. If they stay home, Donald Trump will likely mop the floor with that Democrat. It's all about turnout. So are people just going to say, all right, Joe Biden's the steadier hand, he'll come out there, he can beat Trump, and that's all we want? Well, time's going to tell, but it's very interesting. I mean, look, Donald Trump, I don't care what you think of him, it's a low bar. It's a low bar to beat him. It really is. Just like it was a low bar to beat Obama. But the Republicans screwed that up. And the Democrats may very well screw this up in beating Donald Trump. Not that much. You just got to have a command of policy. Got to sound rational. Be realistic. But the Democrats couldn't do it. They couldn't do it. And you got 2 old white guys, maybe 3 old white guys. Rich white guys nonetheless, that are likely to be the candidate for the Democrats. Can't make this stuff up. This is what I'm talking about. This is how sick our society is. It's basically going to be 2 old men rambling on about nothing on this debate stage. What they remember, what they forget, stop mid-sentence. Look, wait, what happened? What? They already say this stuff. They already stop mid-sentence all the time and just say, look. Especially Trump and Biden. Great. 2 angry men rambling on a debate stage. Yelling at each other, screaming over each other. That's what we devolved to. And no great radical ideas which would just restore America to America. Ending the Federal Reserve, abolishing the federal income tax. Not too difficult. Pretty easy. People just need to wake up. And I think the only time they're going to wake up is when they're smacked in the face with the frying pan. And we're getting closer to that day because the music's about to stop. Are you ready? Stay vigilant, stay diversified, and stay with the Capital News. I am Alex Karitis. Godspeed.